Franklin Richards' fate in Age of Revelation is a fate worse than death, and you guys are going to see what I'm talking about. So this is the World of Revelation comic. It's an anthology book. It actually has a handful of different stories in it. There's two that we're going to cover, but the first one is Franklin. So what we're told here, the way this opens up, is it says, the world is dying, not quickly and not all at once, but it is dying. The X virus is not going to go away. The Revelation territories are not going to stop expanding. One day, they will cover everything. It will be seen as a victory, but it is a death knell. This creature's name is Franklin Richards, and there was a time when he was to be the final survivor of our universe. Now, this is pretty grotesque, right? He's just like a giant slug creature to a degree. So how does he get to this point? That's really kind of the question that we're left asking here. Well, we're kind of told, right? The X virus, for those of you guys who missed the last video that we made, was basically a virus that affected both sentient life, so humans and mutants, as well as the very land around it. And in the case of Franklin, we're told the virus was sudden, unpredictable, striking before anyone could react. It killed his entire family, but it changed him. It induced cruel mutations that left him monstrous and reeling. Franklin had to relearn how to live inside his body. He had been born with the powers of a god, but this new form took them, all of them, from him. It left him powerless. And so we're told, right, his body cannot survive outside the territories. His life is now circumscribed by an ever-expanding area that's slowly but relentlessly devouring the planet. He is wise enough to know what's happened and what continues to happen is not sustainable. It will fall one day, and it will take humankind and mutant kind with it. And when it does, it will be the end of everything for a while anyway. Now that's one of the kickers about this, right? Because there is a period of time that has passed here, and we'll talk about that period of time here in a second, but the world has just kind of devolved into chaos, right? Seemingly those individuals who had not succumbed to the effects of the X virus had just been transformed into a sort of mutated version of what used to be humanity, and they take various forms here, but the world's devolved into chaos, right? The weak being destroyed by the strong, which is kind of what Douglas Ramsey, Revelation, was shooting for in the first place when he kicked all this off. Again, that was covered in the last video that we did. But Franklin ends up making his way to a cave, and when he does, he just says, I got a good haul this month, a really good haul, a book of chemistry and some ceramic art, only to find out that he's being met by Herby, right, the robot of the Fantastic Four, and to a degree, their chronicler, right? And he says, I'm glad, Franklin, it's very good to hear that. And Franklin asks, right, is there anything new? And Herby just says, nothing, Franklin, all is well. And Franklin just says, well, I mean, it hasn't been for a decade, but still, I appreciate it, bud. And so Herby's just like, well, I see you next month. And Franklin says, definitely, I wouldn't miss it. And so Franklin leaves. And then we kind of get a continuation of what he's been doing, right? When humanity and its offshoots are all dead, something else will fill the gap. It will take time, millions and millions of years. Obviously it will. But life endures. Franklin Richards was an artist raised by scientists, and so to stay alive after his transformation, to give himself purpose, despite all he's lost, he created both a project and a practice for himself. Franklin Richards is creating a new doomsday book. The original was finished in 1086 CE, a full accounting of a nation's resources. This new one, in contrast, is to be a full accounting of a world's achievements, all of our knowledge, all our discoveries, all our lessons hard won, in the hope that they might be learned by those who follow without the pain that it cost humanity to learn those things. He prepares for the coming of people he will never meet, for light he will never see. Like all art, it is beautiful, chaotic, improbable, but still just on the razor's edge of possible, but not without its risks, because he's suddenly met by what is in effect a roving band of mutated humans. And this provides some very important context to the story, because again, not all humans who were transformed into mutants or had their mutant genes woken up, activated, or whatever the case may be, not all of them went to join Revelation in Philadelphia in this new Krakoa, for lack of a better word. Some of them just became roving bands of of marauders and pirates, people who were just seeking to do whatever it is that they wanted to do with no real recourse for their actions, shy of coming across a force more powerful than them that would ultimately kill them all off. And so with these marauders, right, they're just like, what is that thing, right? And one of them asked, do you want to sit around and find out? I mean, look at this thing. It's a monster, right? And we're told his body is weak, vulnerable. He tries to save himself, to save this project he's dedicated his life toward. But Franklin Richards fails because they quite literally beat him to death. Right? They kill him on the spot. And that's what's so tragic about all of this. This story is one half basically Franklin Richards experiencing the life of Ben Grimm, suddenly being beset by a power that he doesn't fully understand and being transformed into what he would describe as being a hideous beast. But the other side is the more tragic nature of that. What would happen if Ben Grimm was not super strong and was not indestructible? And that's the fate that awaits Franklin, because once he's dead, this monologue continues on. I know this only by deduction, of course. I cannot leave my cave, because Herby's the one telling us all of this. He says, but our monthly conversations were a dead man's switch of his design, which means that after sufficient time has passed without him checking in on me, the second part of my program activates. I seal my cave. I shut myself down. Carefully and unnoticed, a timeless era passes around me, and then eons and eons later, my waiting is rewarded when seemingly these individuals who were passing by in what really is a now terraformed Earth end up coming across the cave of Herby. They crack it open and they find him, and then ultimately he reactivates. And he says, they have language I will have to learn, customs I will have to comprehend. I will do all these things and more, but for now, I speak to them in a tongue they do not yet understand. I utter my first words, and what I will later learn is over 71 million years. They were written for me by him. And Herby just says, hello, I'm the last survivor of the previous caretakers of this planet. I carry with me their knowledge, their wisdom, and their hopes for a better world. My name is Herby, and I am here to help. So it's a very, very tragic thing, because even after succumbing to this extremely debilitating illness that ultimately cost Franklin his life due to his lack of powers and the fact that he was just so easily defeatable, he was still keeping the best interests of humanity in his heart. And that's why Herby says, despite all that he suffered, all that he lost, the great work of Franklin Richards was a success. Which takes us into the second story that I want to cover here, which is really cool. Those of you guys who were fans of the Krakoa age, a lot of you guys have probably found yourself wondering, what happened to Araco? What happened to Mars when it was terraformed by the mutant population and served as a home of the mutant population for a time? Well, we kind of find out here, even though it had been addressed to a degree in the Power Man Timeless comic, this actually does a lot more to kind of fill in those gaps. And so what this does is it opens up and it says, the messenger waits. He has waited here for 5 days. He would have waited 5 days more. 10 days on the mountain, 10 at the base, gathering supplies for the climb and the vigil. Small jobs of work done for those Iraqi who, for their own reasons, belong nowhere else but here, in Iska's vast shadow. This has been the pattern of his life for the last 8 years, climbing and descending, keeping his vigil, paying his self-imposed penance, waiting, and suddenly the waiting is done. As the psychic signal of Bay the Blood Moon enters his consciousness, he catches and holds it carefully, as if carrying something as precious and fragile as spun crystal, to allow any of the intricacies of the signal to be lost. A single hint of meaning, the smallest nuance, could mean that these 8 years of sacrifice were for nothing at all. When the messenger is sure that he stored the message correctly in the steel vault of his mind, he turns and begins to walk. He has the message now, and it's time to deliver it. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that Bay was basically the love interest of Doug Ramsey, right? Specifically, that happened during the Ten of Swords event, and they had kind of maintained that relationship as best they could, following that going into the fall of the House of X. And she kind of stayed by his side ever since. And so during the kickoff of the Age of Revelation event, she was there at his side, which means whatever's happening as far as the Age of Revelation and the actions of Doug go, she's communicating that to this person. So it's not like this person is picking up on a memory of who she used to be. She's quite literally sending a psychic signal. And so it says, trouble in the foothills. Iska's mountains are for those like Iska who cannot live anywhere else in Araco. Araco is a welcoming world, far more so than Earth in these times, but there are still those who cannot find a place in it. And even Iska's mountains are not for everyone, because Iska does not permit violence. So in the foothills, the gatekeepers gather, threats are made, blades and offensive powers displayed. There is a toll for passing through here. The messenger concentrates idly for a moment, and the toll is paid with interest. So here's something to understand, right? For those of you guys who are kind of new to the X-Men mythos, specifically after the fall of House of X and the end of the Krakoa age, while we don't necessarily have to go fully in depth into the history of Araco and Krakoa and all that kind of stuff, the only thing you really need to understand is that at one point the island of Krakoa was a larger landmass, and that there was an invasion from another dimension, and so that landmass was cut in half in order to save the Earth from that invasion. A gigantic portion of the mutant population as it existed in that very ancient history of Earth traveled into the dimension of Araco, and then named that severed section of the island after that dimension. And within that land, all they ever knew was war. They were constantly fighting this invading force 100% of the time, every day of every year. Now, eventually, all that is undone in an event called Ten of Swords, where basically that entire island is brought back, but because of the fact that the modern-day mutant population is always trying to achieve a peaceful coexistence with humanity, while they do have to fight for survival, they don't believe in fighting as a way of life, right? Which is to say, only the strong deserve to survive, which created a cultural problem between the Araki mutants and the mutants on Earth. So those mutants from Araco ended up taking off to Mars and then renaming Mars to Araco, and they had resided there ever since, until you get to Avengers versus X-Men versus Eternals Judgment Day and the fall of House of X. Specifically during Acts, pretty much all the mutants on Araco were killed. And after the fall of House of X, some mutants on Araco stayed there. Others actually kind of scattered throughout the universe and took up various roles, mercenaries, different things like that. What this is establishing is that even after the fall of House of X, Araco was still there, and there were still mutants who resided there. That the Great Ring, right, the council, the governing body of Araco, still functioned and was barely holding the planet together, but it functioned nonetheless. And so what we're going to end up seeing over the course of this is that the planet is kind of devolved into these small little settlements, these communities, each with their own individual laws. And while it is a tenuous alliance, it's an alliance nonetheless. Now, as far as Iska goes, this bit of a statement about her, Iska was a mutant, for those of you guys who don't recall, who basically had a passive mutant power, which is that she would just be driven to choose the side of whatever battle she was in that was guaranteed to win, a battle, a war, whatever the case was. And in a lot of ways, people would look at her actions, and whatever actions she chose would ultimately be the winning side, because it was just a very meta nature of her power, which is why you didn't really see her invoked all that often, because quite literally, she was a spoiler for a storyline. If the Avengers and the X-Men fought, and Iska was driven to choose the side of the Avengers, then you would know that by the end of the story, the Avengers were going to win, right? So again, it's kind of Marvel creating a problem for themselves, but also solving it by not bringing her in all that often. And so this messenger continues on, and he says, in the Daemon lands, he is a curiosity. As an ally of sorts for Orc, the quick-tongued first speaker, he is left to his own devices. Araki did not often come here. For many, the Daemons are still the enemy. The Daemons, of course, being the original invader that led to so many of those early mutants taking off to the dimension of Araco, or really the dimension of Amenth. But it says, occasionally there are even raiding parties, but there is no action they can take here that seems to matter to the residents. The Daemons have claimed a wide area, but are uninterested in moving beyond it. Instead, they treat this section of the world as they have since the end of the Genesis War, as a reusable canvas. Buildings sprung up overnight, constructed with a feverish intensity, and then are destroyed. Intricate tunnels are dug through the rock, filled in with layers of clay, then dug again. Strange objects are created, considered, torn apart, mourned. There is a pattern to the bustling activity, but the messenger cannot fathom it. A religious exercise, a form of play? Could all of this be some extended satire of the lands around them? Idly, he examines their minds, taking care not to breach the private walls of their inner thoughts. They seem utterly human. And that's kind of the irony of it, right? Human history is nothing if not tearing things down and building things up and then tearing things down and building things up again. Now, of course, we usually build them better than they were when we tore them down. There's a reason why we're not all living in buildings that are reminiscent of the ruins of Pompeii. But still, right? The pattern of human achievement. Because every time we build something, we learn from the thing that we built. With these daemons, though, they don't really do that. They seem to just tear down and rebuild and tear down and rebuild with no real learning being done there, right? They don't tear down mud huts and rebuild them with skyscrapers, right? They just tear down mud huts and then rebuild mud huts. And that's it, right? And so this messenger continues on. He says, in the shadow of the spire vile, the messenger hides, creeping slowly past the gaze of the summoners. Once, there were rumors of dark plans in this place, a cloning project to restore Tarn the Uncaring in a new form with new and terrible powers. If that was ever true, the ripples of events on Earth have disrupted the scheme. The messenger would have preferred Tarn. The new master of the spire is far more dangerous. This is Sugar Man's land. Now here's the thing, right? A couple of explanations here. Tarn the Uncaring was one of the coolest mutants that Marvel had. He was an Araco mutant, and he was an Omega level mutant, but Marvel didn't really do a whole lot with him, mostly because of the fact that he was fighting Magneto, and it was much cooler to see Magneto destroy him than it was to see him destroy Magneto, so we're not too upset about that. But Tarn the Uncaring was an Omega level mutant that had the ability to manipulate the DNA of people around them, which meant turning powers on, turning powers off, deactivating a mutant's X gene entirely. He was incredibly capable, but he was also a product of the Summoner, which means he was one part mutant and one part practitioner of magic. So he was incredibly capable in his own right. Ultimately, he had his head crushed by Magneto, but still, it was a pretty dope fight during Ten of Swords. You guys remember that. Sugar Man, on the other hand, is a very old school character from the Age of Apocalypse in Marvel Comics. The real power of the Sugar Man is the ability to alter his size, but what made him so dangerous was just a sheer level of callousness, a complete lack of empathy. During Age of Apocalypse, for example, this guy ran work camps, right? Like human work camps. This guy was brutal, and that's why there's concern about it being Sugar Man's land, because in this place, if he gets a hold of you, he will make a slave out of you, and he will work you until you die. He'll neutralize your powers using collars of some kind, and that will be the story of you. And so the messenger continues on, right? He says, in Port Prometheus, the humans are suspicious. The original Port Prometheus is long gone, but the name remained as a settlement for Homo sapiens, refugees from Earth. These are the ones who fought against Revelation and survived to tell the tale. And so, mutant powers or no, they are of Araco. Because keep in mind, right, with Araco mutants, while they all do have varying degrees of power, alpha level, omega level, the only thing that really matters to them is, are you willing to fight to the death? Are you willing to put your life on the line for a cause that you believe in? If you're not willing to pay the ultimate price for the cause that you claim to believe in, well then clearly you don't really believe in it at all, right? Because you're not willing to sacrifice anything and everything for it. So honor through conflict, that's really what drives them. And so we continue on. It says, the messenger is surprised at the whispers behind his back, the sharp glances, the angry thoughts. He was under the impression that under Mayor Marshall, Port Prometheus had maintained good relations with their mutant neighbors. For a moment, he wonders if the old hatreds and bigotries of the old Earth diseases are finding new breeding grounds here in this new world. And then he understands the truth. They are not suspicious of mutants, they are suspicious of him, because they are of Araco and he is not. They know he sees this planet not as a home, but as a place of exile, a place of martyrdom. He hates it here, and they despise him in return. And it says in the Meadowlands, he has to fight. The rest of Araco has mellowed somewhat in the years since the Genesis War. The Araci are growing more used to peace, but the Morrowlanders have only grown harder. Under Genesis, artists and poets were despised. Under Tarn, they were imprisoned and tortured. Even in the early days of planet Araco, they were othered. That was the fire that forged them. On Araco, those who create are the most dangerous warriors of all. And in the Morrowlands, art is sacred. The thought that generates the art is sacred. Sacred and private. It has been 6 years since the first telepath was killed for stealing ideas. They were not the last. Telepaths are barred from the Morrowlands, but the fastest way to the coast is through the Morrowlands. Self-expression takes many forms. On Araco, the forging of swords is a form of art, as is their use. The messenger hopes he survives this artistic experience. And so finally, he gets to weaponless Zen. Now, weaponless Zen is, I wouldn't say an enigma among the Araki mutants from Marvel Comics, but she wasn't really born with a offensive power, which is to say, something she can use on an enemy in order to destroy them, which is really the most valued power in the Araki mutant population. Instead, she had the ability to quote-unquote paint the truth, but it was really more of like a passive or artistic ability. And so what ends up happening is there comes a point when she actually had these kind of swords of sorts fastened to her own body, right? Not that dissimilar from like Marrow, for those of you guys who remember that character. But if we're looking for like a more tangible explanation, she kind of functions like Baraka from Mortal Kombat, if you guys get what I'm saying. But it's kind of interesting here, right? Because it says, weaponless Zen waits for him at the shore of Subunur's sea. She has been many things in her long life, a warrior for the Vile, a mercenary for the Galactic Council, and now she has taken her father's place as the seat of nothing, one of the 9 seats of the Great Ring that quietly keeps this world turning. Behind her back, they call her the Fisher Queen. Now, they call her that because she's quite literally the daughter of the Fisher King. The Fisher King was a guy who was born in the dimension of Amenth, right, with the Araki mutant population, but didn't have any powers. But he was still respected among all the mutants within Araco, or within the dimension of Amenth, because he still fought as if he was one of them. So again, he basically gained their respect, which is why powers are not the most important thing in the Araki mutant population. But it continues on, right? Without comment, she binds his wounds and ferries him across the quiet ocean to Autumn Island and to the Autumn Palace, where basically Apocalypse resides. Now remember, Apocalypse was the one who chose Doug as his new herald and tasked him with basically bringing a kind of era to the population of Earth where the weak would be destroyed by the strong, a kind of survival of the fittest for the entire planet. Hence the reason why all this Age of Revelation kicked off in the first place. And that's what the messenger just says. It's very imposing, old friend. I think Magneto would have been impressed. And Apocalypse just says thank you, right? And he says, but I fear we have little time to discuss architecture. And that's where this guy says, of course, every second is precious, though in that spirit, I could have placed the message in your mind from half a world away. And Apocalypse just says, I do not trust you at the best of times, old friend. I need to see your eyes before I let my guard down. Besides, how important could a message be if you'd risk nothing to deliver it? And that's where this guy is just like, as ever, your logic is unique to you, Apocalypse. And he just says, message delivered, when he telepathically sends it into Apocalypse's mind. And Apocalypse just says, just as I feared, right? The boy paddles in the shadows, refusing to enter deeper waters. He takes the easy road, the lazy path. He has not done enough. He is not enough. I should have chosen Richter. Now, here's an important thing to understand here, right? Richter was at one point believed to be the new herald of Apocalypse. He had the ability to manipulate the very tectonic plates of the Earth itself, but Apocalypse ultimately chose Douglas instead. And what's really interesting about this is that when he talks about the idea that Douglas is taking the easy path, what seems to be happening during the Age of Revelation is that Douglas is just carving out a section of the world for himself and ruling it like a king, as opposed to judging the entirety of the human world. Now, of course, the virus is taking care of a lot of that for him, right? The weak are being replaced by the strong, and it's just kind of the natural order of things. But he doesn't really have a hands-on approach the way that Apocalypse did in his early days, traveling from one kingdom to another, pitting the society against itself, right? Starting civil wars or starting causing conflicts between countries, right? Huge wars, different things like that. Instead, Douglas is just kind of sitting back and letting things take care of themselves. A very indirect approach. And that's where this guy says, we all have regrets. After all, Douglas was my student too, only for us to find out this is Xavier, which most of you guys probably guessed by now. And Apocalypse just says, indeed. And so, out of respect, I will ask your opinion. Should we take the harder road, Charles? Should we give this child a chance? Or should we destroy him now? With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Again, Age of Revelation is shaping up to be pretty interesting. I mean, it doesn't really have me like hooked and like driven to read the whole thing, but it is kind of cool, right? So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. But we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.